Welcome to Three Count Commentaries, and you know I was going to talk about this Pat McAfee, Vince McMahon sit down, and this joint was very good. And you know what made it even better is when it was announced that Vince McMahon was going to be on Pat McAfee's show, and then it was announced that Pat McAfee was going to be wrestling at WrestleMania, even though I didn't believe at all that he was going to be wrestling Vince. I expected this to be an angle. And that's really kind of when I went into it. I was like, all right, what angle are they going to shoot here? Is it going to be like Austin Theory? He's going to jump Pat McAfee from behind? Are they going to mock the whole Costas interview or one of Vince's other contentious interviews? And then as Vince gets rattled and upset, Austin Theory is going to jump out of nowhere and attack him. None of that occurred. It was a straight up chill interview in which Pat McAfee broached some subjects that Vince didn't completely touch on, but there were things that people kind of wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about Saudi Arabia and doing business in Saudi Arabia, which is something that, Vince actually did talk about. He mentioned AEW. Vince kind of sidestepped that whole thing, but he did discuss some subjects. But more importantly, I think he dropped a lot of gems of wisdom that people can actually learn from. I mean, the guy is 76 years old, and you would think that people picked up, a thing or two about life in their 76 years. Now, of course, a lot of folks are upset that people actually walked away from this interview liking Vince, and you can have that love-hate concept of Vince, which I think most people does. Most people kind of hate the way he goes about his business, but they appreciate everything that he's actually done. I don't understand how you couldn't appreciate somebody who, for the last 40 years, most American children have been consuming the product that he created. Even if you say, you hated today's modern wrestling, or, you don't like the Attitude Era because of the gratuitous sex and the gratuitous violence, or the new video games suck, the new action figures suck, I got into a lengthy thing on Twitter about the Ring Boy scandal. You could talk about all that stuff, and all of it's fair to discuss, but Vince is not going to sit down and rehash the Ring Boy scandal or Owen Hart or, all the stuff that's been done to death in the media. That just doesn't, that's not what this interview is for. This interview is to sort of pick the brain of Vince. This isn't what some people wanted was these contentious Nixon Frost debate over a subject, and it's like that's not really. No, for starters, we don't really learn anything from those situations anyway. You can actually quote mine a lot easier from a chill interview like this than from something where somebody's trying to lead them and bait them and all that kind of stuff. Even though Pat McAfee tried to lead Vince into some things, Vince was able to sidestep it because, he's got years of being able to, and he didn't ask any direct questions anyway. So I think that it was very good. So we're going to go through it eventually but I'm giving it like a little bit of a preamble here. And I walked away from it saying to myself, I didn't have more appreciation for Vince afterwards because I think I contextualize Vince McMahon better than anybody else. I have no intense dislike of him. And actually, he's one of my favorite people because he does make hard decisions and tough decisions. And he makes them and kind of moves on while other people kind of dwells on it. And I think that's one of the things that we learn in this interview is that he understands that tough decisions need to be made. And he understands that, when you're in a certain position, you have to make those decisions. And somebody has to, somebody's got to make the decisions. And he is the one willing to make the decision and take the heat for it. So there's nothing but, you can't be nothing but admirable about that. Because there's a lot of people who online, specifically, as a matter of fact, as I'm rambling, let's get into one of the subjects, which I think K-Side Seats and a lot of other channels got really upset. Where Vince said that cutting people, he referred to talent as dead weight. Let's talk about that from the beginning. So in the long and the short of it, matter of fact, let's just read what with Cage Side Seats transcription. We're going to read that so that we'll make sure that everybody's on the same page and my summary of it isn't being biased one way or the other. So Pat McAfee says, people always assume that you have no heart and you do not care about at all about any of these people. Are any of these decisions more difficult than others? Or is it just always what would make the best show in your eyes? Vince responded, I'm always concerned about what's best for the audience. Always. What does the audience want? And if you have dead weight around, you have situations whereby someone's not cutting it, and you have an opportunity for someone else to come in, it's like, okay, that's probably the best thing. It's one of the reasons why with Hulk Hogan and a lot of those guys who left me at one time, it's why I brought them back. What's the best thing for business? If the audience wants Hulk Hogan back, you bring him back if he has value that way. In other words, a lot of people took this completely to the heart and said, he's calling the wrestlers that he fired dead weight. Well, some of them, I think you could probably pick 5 or 6 of them out of all of the 120 or whatever that he actually released. You could probably pick about 5 or 6 of them that were legitimate prospects, that had potential, that were over, and that, were actually pretty good. Now, I don't want to get into the merits of every single person that was released in WWE over the last 2 or 3 years, mainly because some of those people quit. Some of those people wanted to quit and then got fired. There were people who quit on Twitter and then over time they, it's like, okay, and then they got fired later and it was like, oh, I can't believe you will fire me. There was a lot of individual decisions. But what Vince is saying is, if things are not working out, it's best to just let them go. If things have run their course, it's best to just let them go. And in some instances, that is the case. We're dealing with somebody like Bray Wyatt. Makes a lot of money for the company in terms of merchandise, but the gimmick had kind of run its course. At least that's what some people believe. I personally like Bray Wyatt. A lot of people hated him. A lot of the people who are going to be attacking Vince hate Bray Wyatt. Voted him worst gimmick again and again and again and again. Worst match, worst gimmick, yada, 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 yada. Right? But that doesn't mean that the Fiend doesn't have value. What he's saying is, okay, we struggled to, keep this thing relevant. Maybe it's time for it to go away for a while. And if he has value in that way, like he said about Hulk Hogan, you bring him back. And that's the sort of thing that, that made sense to me. The whole specific dead weight argument, you can talk about a lot of people being dead weight on the roster. People who are on the roster who literally don't do anything and add nothing of value to the show. We could go about and talk about individual people like the Iconics, for instance. Oh, people love the Iconics. Sure, but they weren't the Iconics when they were fired. Once we've seen the Iconics do all of the backstage stuff that they have been doing, and they were separated as, into singles acts, neither one of them brought that much. And it's amazing to me that, people love them so much and people don't watch Impact. They're on Impact doing Iconics and nobody cares. It's like, so you could look at all of these people that Vince released. How many of them have proven him wrong? That's like one of the comments in the comment section to the Cage Side Seats article is how much of that dead weight is doing so well in AEW. I'm like, yeah, please tell me how well are they doing? Miro hasn't been on TV in months. Malachi Black is in pretty much the same position he was in. He's got a little bit more exposure, but he's in a tag team in AEW. Oh, he's got his own cult or whatever. It's like, okay, I guess that's special. I guess, but those are the only 2 guys. And Andrade is barely on AEW TV. What about everybody else that he got fired? He fired over 100 people. They're not exactly out here setting the world on fire. And the only one who really is out there increasing his value is Matt Cardona. Goddamn Zack Ryder is the only one out there that Vince fired within the last 2 or 3 years that probably have increased his value since he was released. So when Vince says, okay, you got a lot of dead weight laying around, yeah, it's rough. It's rough terminology. But is it wrong? Is it false? You could say, well, a guy like Keith Lee, is he dead weight? It's like, well, no, I don't think Keith Lee wasn't around that long. Same thing with Karrion Kross. But it was pretty clear Karrion Kross wasn't going to get over. Keith Lee might have been a different situation. They gave Kross, now they did kind of fuck him up with the booking and everything. So, maybe it's not 100% their fault. And they discussed this too in this piece where, Pat McAfee said, in our world, meaning the NFL, is always the coach. The coach fucked me. The coach screwed me over. The coach didn't give me a chance. The coach fucked me over. And Vince said at that point, like, it's always with the blame game. And he has no problem with being the bad guy. But he's not running the business on his heart anymore. He's running the business as a business. And it's not personal that, these guys have nothing to add currently, or they can't add anything currently. Therefore, they move on. And I don't see a problem with that. Just because Vince says that this guy's dead weight doesn't mean that the guy is not talented. It just means that, there's a lot of good players who get cut from the NFL, to continue with their analogy. Good players get cut all the time because they're not great players. Because there are other good players on the team, and the team would rather have those guys. Or the team is going in a different direction, whatever that direction may be. Sometimes you will see a really good player get cut because the team's going younger. So they want somebody younger in that position. And strictly for that reason. We don't want to pay whatever this guy wants. It could be financial. It could be any other reason. But the important thing is Vince says, we're going to get rid of some guys and bring some guys in. It was time to cut, some people and bring some new people in. And people really hyper focus, and this is one thing that they do really well in the media, is they hyper focus on individual throwaway lines. Well, I say quote mining, right? They really hyper focus on this whole dead weight thing. And you have to realize people were talking about WWE's roster being bloated 2 years ago, before all the firings. You could find all of these people who are complaining now, talking about how WWE's roster is bloated. They got so much talent. They don't do anything with them. And now Vince is like, all right, start firing people. Start letting people go. All of a sudden, it's, oh no, it's bad. Fed bad. It's like, but you just said they were bloated. And, you just said that. It's just like they agree with you, and now they're going to get rid of people they feel like they don't need. You can disagree with that. You could say, okay, I can understand getting rid of Lucha House Party. You're not going to push them. They're not your thing. But why Keith Lee? Why Karrion Kross? Why Samoa Joe? Why this guy? Why that guy? Yes, we understand you disagree with individual decisions. But this is when you said people needed to go. The roster is bloated. They took that as there are certain people on this roster we don't need. Listening to the audience, even though that would be the internet audience, which he admits he doesn't listen to. And they were the ones crowing the loudest about WWE's roster being bloated. And now they're the ones crowing the loudest about WWE releasing talent. It's like you can't win either way. In that instance, that leads us to another Vince McMahon quote that was from this thing where he says he doesn't have a problem being an asshole. And that, he doesn't argue with people. And he's not going to spend time trying to change people's perceptions of him. And he talked about, and I think this was very good. He talked about the intellectual cost, but what he probably meant is the opportunity cost. In economics, there's a thing called opportunity cost. And what happens is if you have to make a decision, right? There's a cost, a double cost to that, what he calls a double negative. There's a double cost to that, decision. If you spend $10 to go see the Batman in the theaters, right? That's $10 you did not spend doing something else, right? So that means the movie cost $10 for you to go see, and you lose 2 hours of value of your life. Plus, so it's probably like a triple negative if you go to the movie, spent money on it, and then you didn't like it. Then there's the hidden cost of what else could you have been doing. So that's what Vince is talking about here. He's saying, like, for every time I could chase perceptions and try to change people's perceptions, I could have been doing something else. And that's why he doesn't concern himself with it. And I said to myself, like, that's fucking brilliant. And it's true. You know, like if you take time out to, and I said this, and I don't want to get political about it, but this was kind of like the Donald Trump situation, right? Like a guy like Trump would spend a large part of his interviews defending himself. You know, it would be, you're a Nazi, you're a racist, you're this, you're this, you're this, you're this. And you spend a great deal of time defending yourself against all of these accusations rather than just doing whatever it is you were supposed to do, that you were put in position to do, or that you have the power to do. You know, you see that also in people, when people get into these situations, they spend a lot of time defending themselves against attackers rather than just doing whatever they were put on this earth to do, or what they put in their mind to do. And what Vince is saying is, I put my effort and my energy towards things that I should be doing. I have a company to run. I'm going to run that company. I'm not going to run around here worried about my reputation in the public, in the media. And I can't do anything about that anyway. You can't change their minds. And this interview, you know, is a perfect encapsulation of that, considering people who walked into this interview, most of them walked out with the same concept of Vince McMahon. He's an evil trillionaire business owner who hates everybody and is a soulless machine or whatever. And then other people walked away with, oh my God, I love Grandpa Vince. But it's all about what did you walk in with? You know, what kind of conception did you walk into this interview with? And that's likely was heightened one way or the other when you walked out. If you walked in thinking Vince was an asshole, then you focused on the dead weight comment. You focused on the, I'll listen to the audience. And then you focus on the complete, you know, erasure of the internet audience, which we will talk about in a moment. And then you say, see, Vince is everything I thought he was. If you are a WWE loyalist, an E-drone, as they would say, and Grandpa Vince is talking about, you know, focusing on the audience and what does the audience really want? What does the audience care about? And that sort of stuff. You think, wow, Vince is great. You know, it depends on how you walked in, because you're going to get a little of both. And that to me seems very balanced in a way, that he's not in there to get his ass kissed and to have a cupcake interview. You know, it was a little nicer than I would have expected it to be. But Pat McAfee works there, so that shouldn't be that big of a problem. But I liked the interview because it forced Vince to talk about some things that he really doesn't discuss in public. And it makes sense that, you know, he would view things through a certain lens. The dead weight comment added a lot of credence to the people who were, he's an asshole. He doesn't care about people's lives and families. And Vince even said later, you know, people get hit by buses all the time. You know, there's always going to be something. You know, somebody just had a baby. You know, somebody in the family got cancer. And when he was, you know, running the business from you know, with his heart, as he would say, these decisions were harder. But he said that, you know, when he started running the business and taking it public, now he's got shareholders and stakeholders. He's got other people to consider. He can't just run the company the way he wants to run it anymore. You know, his personal desires have to be blunted to a degree because that makes him a better businessman. And, you know, again, this is another thing that people jumped all over by saying, oh yeah, going public, you know, changed Vince and yada, yada, yada. It's like, sure, but he has to be responsible now to all of these people, you know. And that's one thing that I think I say that quite often on this channel when I talk about people, you know, and talk about billionaires or people who own business, entrepreneurs or whatever. It's not just their own pocketbooks that they're concerned with here. You know, Vince, again, has plenty of money. He's had plenty of money for a long time. When you're talking about other people's money, you know, other people's livelihoods, other people's situations, that he has to, you know, create value for them. He has to create value for his partners. He has to create values for the talent. You know, why would the talent want to be there if they can't get paid? And if you can, you know, increase, you know, in talent value, that's good for them because they get to get paid more. Now, what that may mean is that some of their best good friends have to get released, have to get fired, you know, and people don't want to believe that, but it is true. You know, money is not infinite, no matter how much of it. Now, it may have infinite growth, but it's not infinite. WWE doesn't have an infinite blank checkbook to which they can pay everybody $150 million or whatever it is they think that they're worth. You know, it's just not possible. There's going to be a talent budget. And I saw this too. Nobody mentions the budget cuts, or Pat McAfee didn't mention the budget cuts. The thing is, when you have a talent budget, it doesn't matter what it is. Movies have talent budgets. They may have $150 million to make a movie. The talent budget could be $25 million, you know, and everything else is for the lighting, marketing, yada, yada, yada. There's going to be allocations. It's a business venture. You know, WrestleMania is a business venture. When you have WrestleMania, you're going to talk about marketing WrestleMania. How much money are we going to spend on commercials? How much money are we going to spend on posters? How much money are we going to spend sending wrestlers to interviews? You know, are we going to pay to get these wrestlers on these interviews, a little quid pro quo, which could entirely be possible and sometimes actually does occur, you know, that sort of thing. Then you have to pay the talent, and you want to pay them a really good rate to show up on this show. Then you have to pay for the venue. And if you want to run 2 nights, you got to pay for the venue twice. You know, you got to, you know, it's a lot of things that go into it, and you have to get your money back. So it's not an infinite amount of money that goes into every Monday Night Raw, every SmackDown, every NXT is the exact same way. So if you have 300 wrestlers per brand, and you're not going to use 300 wrestlers per brand, it makes perfect sense for you to cut the talent. I mean, I don't understand why people are so dumb about this. And it doesn't matter when it happened. Whether it's a pandemic, before the pandemic, after the pandemic, it didn't matter. Ultimately, the pandemic is one of the reasons why there were so many budget cuts in the first place, because they wasn't using that many people. And they couldn't use that many people because, as Vince talked about, they were doing all the testing and they were trying to make the bubble small as possible. And they realized they can run the shows with a skeleton crew and said, okay, so we don't need all of these guys. As opposed to before the pandemic, where they were quote unquote hoarding talent because they thought, okay, you know, there was no real restrictions on what they could do or who could be there or whatever. Now we're talking about, okay, we have to restrict the amount of people who coming into this building. That means, should we be paying people to sit at home knowing that they can't come in? They may live far away. They may live in Canada, or they may live in Mexico, or they may live on the other side of the country, or they just don't want to come in, which is a thing with Authors of Pain. They did an interview recently where they said they chose to stay home during the pandemic and ended up getting cut because it's like, why are we paying you if you're not going to come in? We're not using you, you know? And that's just kind of how it goes. So he said, like, okay, it made me a better businessman to go public. People are like, oh yeah, you just got rid of all of your empathy. And it's like, well, it's not about empathy, because he has to think about just more than this one person. He has to think about the 100 to 200 to 300 other people who work for him, who could be affected by having a bloated roster, who could be affected by having so many people under contract that we don't need. That's one of the things you have to consider. Another one of my favorite quotes in here is he talked about going to Saudi Arabia. And he said that he always knew that there were big Saudi fans. And he says that there is nowhere on the globe that WWE doesn't have any a presence. And he talked about respecting other cultures. And he says that the Saudi fans are no different than any other fans. That people love Western culture everywhere. They just don't like Western governments. And he said, then he went from there to talk about how WWE essentially fits into everything, because it's something that you can translate into different languages. It's something that people understand, and it's a spectacle, and people enjoy it, and it fits into pretty much all cultures. But, you know, he says, what do you think we're going to do? You know, culture has been in position for 1,000 years. You think that we're going to come in and change it? He's like, no, we have to respect other people's cultures. And I felt like that was a pretty good argument. It's a pretty good statement that he made. of course, this same day, for people who haven't been paying attention, WWE Network shut down in Russia, after Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. So people are like, okay, WWE Network is cut off in Russia. And this is what they're doing, is they're punishing the Russian people all of a sudden for what the Russian government is doing. And I don't agree with that. But it's very odd that Vince would say we need to respect other people's cultures and yada, yada, yada. And then the same day that the WWE Network is cut off in Russia because of Russian aggression in Ukraine. So it's like you open the door for people to say, what about, Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed by the Saudi government? What about that? It's okay to cut off the network to Russia. It's not okay to cut off, business with the royal prince of Saudi Arabia. You have to create a standard and stick with it. And I 100% will agree with that. And then when I saw the article on Russia, I was like, wow, how can they justify this? Putin is an asshole. Absolutely. But you're trying to tell me Mohammed bin Salman is not also an asshole? I don't know. And then it was very weird because in Saudi Arabia, you're working directly with that government, where in WWE, I think they had a deal with some third party. So it was like they partnered with another organization in Russia. Now, if you tell me that other organization is siding with the Russian government, then I would say, okay, then they choose not to do business with them because they're invading and killing, foreign governments. But you're also talking about the death of a single person and, possibly the backwardness of their entire society in Saudi Arabia versus the outward aggression and routine aggression of Russia. So that's something that we can talk about, and something that I think is a good point when people brought that up is that, Vince, how could you sit here and say we need to respect other cultures and then say, okay, Russia bad, we're going to take the network away from them. At the same time, though, I understand also what Vince is saying, because Russia is kind of, it's an Eastern culture, kind of, but it's also kind of Western, because there's large parts of Russia that is in Asia. That's what makes it Eastern, but it's Western in terms of, a lot of the cultural aspects of Russia, in terms, there's a McDonald's and, KFC, all of these, big box Western organizations, they operate in Russia. So, there's something to consider. But that was one of my favorite situations too, is when he talked about, trying to respect the Saudi culture and, understanding that the people don't like the government of the United States, or don't like Western culture in general. But they, don't like Western governments, but they love Western culture. And that's always been true. And I believe I've had a bit of a short lecture on this channel before about Iran. When, 1950s Iran, they had movie theaters, girls was to walk around in bikinis, all that kind of stuff. And it was, the clerics and the religious leaders who turned people against it. So, and which is still happening in Saudi Arabia. I think I've said that too, is that, as Saudi Arabia becomes a little bit more Western, inch by inch, there's still going to be people that are resistant of it, even though it's the government that's actually westernizing it a little bit. That's just kind of how it is. And because you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of years of history and how people believe that the world should be, and you're coming into their society, you have to fit your product to their society. And WWE has done a good job of that by, simple things like covering the women up. If you can be respectful, then you can actually create progress. Now, he didn't answer the question of, does he see any progress in Saudi Arabia? Maybe it was just a thing Pat slipped in there and he just didn't think to answer it. But there's articles that says that Saudi Arabia is actually changing and that people are not thrilled about it. So, and that stuff can come from not, actual news sources. But there's also people who are saying that, things ain't changed as much as you think. Ultimately, and there's not a lot of people who have been to Saudi Arabia and have been talking about it. Some people who live there don't have a problem with it. Other people who have lived there have a huge problem with it. It's just like every other country in the world. So we're going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about Vince and the audience, which I think is very important and something that, he talked a lot about. And then I'm not going to end up not hitting everything, but this was a very important piece, I think, to this story. Vince, in talking about the audience, he talked a lot about listening to the audience and what the audience wants. And he says we have a focus group every night. This is something that I think I've heard Stephanie actually say too. That essentially, you get responses from the live audience to tell people what to do more of and what to do less of. And one of the things is, it's very interesting because in one respect, you do get people who get almost no reaction that are routinely eating up a lot of television time, like Happy Corbin. Now we're just talking about creative, right? You have certain people who are they're absolute bombs everywhere that they go, like a Happy Corbin. Everybody hates this guy. He's fucking terrible. I'm pretty sure if I digged into the ratings probably slip and fall the fuck off a cliff the moment he comes on TV. Yet he gets on TV every single week. And then you have other people who are kinda or mildly over, who don't get any time at all. And so it's easy to be like, all right, Vince is full of shit on this. And, that was even something that I can't even smooth over. Even if you think I'm an apologist, I'm not going to hear that and be like, okay, that makes sense to me. No, it doesn't. There's people out there who get more opportunities than they should. There's people who get over, and Vince says that getting over is a team effort, which I think is the best thing that I've heard him say about getting over before. And he talked a lot about, character, really being that character, really wanting to be hated if you're a heel, going out there with the intent to get people to really hate you. And so you can say, maybe that's what Corbin does better than most. He goes out there with the intention of being hated, of not being liked. Even when people were enjoying his character, which was downtrodden, bum-ass Corbin. People enjoyed it, but he still went out there with the same intent to be disliked, even though the look and everything brought sympathy to him. People went out there with intense dislike of him. And people still have an intense dislike of him. But you have to ask what kind of heat is that? Because it's not translating on a screen or in media as being the kind of heat that people want. It's being translated as go away heat. Nobody can stand this fucking guy. He's awful, So we can talk about that. And I think that that's a good point too, for people who are saying, Vince says he cares about the audience, but he doesn't push Ricochet. It's like, okay, Ricochet's been on the roster for quite a while. And when you have somebody like Ricochet, he has no character. He has no persona, no personality, no persona. So what can you really do with him outside of just putting him in the ring? And this is where Vince says something that I think was, caught people's attention, and another controversial issue that Vince says that anybody can be a wrestler, whether they wrestle poorly or wrestle well. But do you want to be a pro wrestler or a WWE superstar? I think a WWE superstar sounds better. And that WWE superstars have, a desire to grow. And he also talked later about, when people graduate from WWE. I thought that was good language right there. But he talked about being a WWE superstar versus being a pro wrestler. For starters, early in the interview, he said that he uses words, marketing, branding to separate himself. Sports entertainment, the concept of it, was to separate from everybody else, to do something unique, something that can't be mixed in with what other people are doing. So that's very important. I like that, and I've been talking about that for a long time. Whenever people get on the whole sports entertainment, pro wrestling thing, like pro wrestling is sports entertainment. The NFL is also sports entertainment. All right. So, boxing is sports entertainment. UFC is sports entertainment. All sports are entertainment. It's literally a corporate nothing word that people get really tied up in a knot about. All sports are entertainment. So when you take that into account, that Vince is, sports entertainment, WWE superstar, stupendous. He's basically telling you it's all marketing. It's all branding. It's all just our way of lifting things and making our stuff seem different than other people's stuff. So when you look at wrestlers, and you're saying who is truly a WWE superstar and who is truly just a pro wrestler. You could be a good pro wrestler, but not be a WWE superstar. And that WWE superstars are a specific kind of pro wrestler. And I like that distinction. And I think other people will too, because he talked about having acting talent and having reacting talent and having a desire to grow and a thirst for challenges and to do different things. When he talked about talent, quote unquote, graduating from WWE, he said that it's better than a doctorate. It's better than having a bachelor's degree because you learn so much about life and the world and respect and, being able to adapt to anything. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. It sounds like bullshit. It really does. But then you watch other wrestling promotions and you still see the WWE influence, even when people aren't there. Watch AEW, for instance. You see a lot of WWE influence in AEW. And it's a lot from the guys who have been there for a long time. The Danielsons, the Moxleys, the Punks, the Jerichos. Even if they don't want that stuff, it's still there. It's still there. The dramatic storytelling of it. When you go and you watch, the territory era, like I said, WWE created the dueling promo. The long-winded dueling promo, the in-ring monologue where you tell a story about what's been going on here and there. That kind of stuff started in WWF. So whenever somebody says, oh, this is pro wrestling, it's like, no, it's not. Bill Watson never would have given the Junkyard Dog 15 minutes to stand in front of people and run down Ernie Ladd and create this entire world about, him and Ernie Ladd and all this kind of stuff. It would have been simple. Ernie Ladd, you're a dirty dog. I'm going to tear your head off and kick it into the front row and all that kind of stuff, which is traditional pro wrestling. You don't take 10 minutes to talk about a guy. Usually because you don't have that kind of time. Your show is only an hour, so when you start having these long-winded monologues that involves a lot of drama and a lot of storytelling and people crying and stuff like that, that stuff really was popularized by WWF. Even if you can find bits and pieces of it, like in a World Class, where they might do a vignette or Von Erich might do a sit down and they're talking about, an injury or the feud with the Freebirds or something like that. It's not in the way that the WWE popularized in the Attitude Era, where you have the dueling promo, where you have one guy standing on one side of the ring, the other guy standing on the other side of the ring, or one guy standing on the ramp, and he's talking to him 2 or 3 minutes uninterrupted without a fight. And then maybe the fight comes later. Like, that's something that WWE created. So even all the people who are, we do pro wrestling, we don't do sports entertainment, they do sports entertainment. Because the difference is WWE focuses more on the theater, the acting, the drama. If you're watching MJF and CM Punk right now as I record this video and you're like, oh, I love this, congratulations, that's WWE shit. When he says anybody can be a pro wrestler, but not everybody can be a WWE superstar, I completely understand what he's saying. And what I think the problem is that they call everybody on the roster a WWE superstar. So it seems like, Aaliyah is a WWE superstar, even though she can't really do anything. And Roman Reigns is also a WWE superstar, which even though he can do everything, he can carry an entire 10-minute promo segment by himself and get great reactions and tell a story without taking a bump. While you have some guys who need to go out there and take bumps in order to get over. Those guys are pro wrestlers. And there's nothing wrong with that. I expect that quote to be quote mined, though, especially by somebody like Eddie Kingston or some being the elite stuff. And you'll see a lot of people trying to take pot shots at that. I'm proud of being a pro wrestler. Like, okay, whatever. But here's the things I really wanted to talk about. And this is sort of the grand finale. Is Vince said that, we got a focus group every night talking about the audience and the audience investment in a wrestler. Now we could talk about that too, because he talked about, with, the creative process. Wrestlers need to have an alternative if they're going to pitch ideas, that sort of thing. And that brings us to the focus group, where he talked about the audience. And Vince talked a lot about the audience. I've already mentioned the audience a little bit here already, where Vince is saying, hey, what does the audience want? What is the audience reacting to? I've spent a lot of time on this channel talking about the audience and the changing of the audience. And one of the things I've been really trying to impress upon people who do things like create YouTube channels, podcasts about wrestling, talk about wrestling on Twitter, they're a part of the wrestling bubble, the wrestling community, is that you're not necessarily the audience. Once you reach a certain age for WWE, you're not really the audience anymore. That's part of the thing. You know, when you create a certain opinion of yourself, or you have a certain standard, that's not really what, if you want WWE to be more like New Japan, then you're a fan of New Japan, not WWE. And that's going to be the long and the short of it. WWE is not going to try to be like New Japan. So the more they become what they are, and the more you like New Japan, the more those things are going to diverge. They're not ever going to be, they may do the same thing and may operate within the same industry, but WWE is going to do WWE. New Japan is going to do New Japan. The more you like one of those two things, you know, the more you understand that the other one is not what you're looking for. There's people who love WWE, or at least will watch it, that won't turn on a New Japan show at all. They have no interest in that. King of Sports, all that shit. They have no interest in that. And there are some people who are fans of the Japanese puroresu, and they look over and they see Toni Storm getting hit in the face with a pie, and they're like, oh, that would never have happened when she was in Stardom. I cannot stand this. You know, this is indignity and all that kind of shit. That's fine too. Just realize that you have different tastes. So when Vince says that he doesn't listen to the internet audience, and that the internet audience is harsh and biased, guess what? He is absolutely right. I don't think the man's ever said anything truer. Because when people are looking at things, and this is the number one thing that I think people need to talk about when they are interested in a subject, is how interested are you really in it? How much do you really like it? Over the years, we have been saying that, you know, Meltzer doesn't like WWF, has never really liked it. So all of the matches of the year are going to be outside of WWF. All of the wrestlers of the year are going to be outside of WWF. If he can manage to get away with, you know, a non-WWF winning it, he will. You know, he'll push that. He will talk glowingly about New Japan or All Japan or AEW or Ring of Honor or whatever, and run WWE down. And it's because he is a guy with a specific kind of taste. If he would have just said, this is more my speed, the Japanese style of pro wrestling that emphasizes athleticism, not so much on the theatrics, not so much on the promos, not so much on the gimmicks and the angles and stuff like that. I really don't like that stuff. Then people would be more honest when he says, I really don't like that stuff, so I gave it 3 stars. I gave Hogan and Rock 3 stars because I don't really like either one of them as workers. I think it was a great atmosphere, yada, 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 but I just don't like it. You know, I don't like these guys. These aren't my favorite guys. Go watch Mitsuharu Misawa or whatever, right? If he just said that, I think people would take him more seriously. But when it becomes across like he is some unbiased arbiter of truth, then people are kind of like, okay, fuck this guy. There's no way you can look at Rock and Hogan and say that match was 3 stars. There's just no fucking way, you know? And then later on, you know, in your life or in a different place, say, oh, it was a great crowd reaction, 5 stars. Bullshit. You know, there's a lack of consistency here based on your bias. You like these guys more, so you give them better ratings, you know, and people do that stuff. You know, I would not want people who love jazz to rate my rap albums. I don't want people who like rock music to rate my rap albums. Like, I don't get the whole thing where people watch videos of folks who don't like a genre and they go into watching videos of that genre, unless they come out of it, you know, being open-minded, which most people are not. Most people are not open-minded. I think they are, but they're not. Like, I've always had a more, and I hate to put myself over, which you know, it is what it is, but I grew up with my dad listening to classical music. So my dad didn't listen to like regular old black people stuff. My mom listened to the blues. My mom liked funk. So a lot of my taste of music comes from what my mom listened to. And then I grew up listening to rap music. But my dad, you know, was classical music. He liked to sit in his room, read, and he'll have like Beethoven or whatever playing. It sounds like very middle class. But my dad was fucking broke. He just didn't like noise. You know, he just didn't like, you know, loud, thunderous drums or, you know, screaming guitars and stuff like that. He just did not like that stuff. He liked pianos. He liked violins. You know, that was his individual taste. I would not ask my dad to rate the rap albums that I'm listening to. He doesn't fucking like them. All right. So he doesn't have the ears that I have. He's not going to like what I like. I'm not going to ask my mom to listen to my rap albums and to rate them. No, she has a different taste of what she likes in her music. This stuff is too vulgar. It's too violent. This is not real instruments, all that kind of stuff. You're going to get all that shit. So it's the same for everything. If, you're going to have certain wrestling fans who are going to be more fans of the athletic portion, and WWF does not focus on that. And it's been this way for 40 fucking years. Could you imagine being so stupid as having people still have the same conversation for 40 fucking years? It's absolutely awful. There are still people out here think that they're breaking news by saying Hulk Hogan wasn't a good wrestler or The Rock was a terrible wrestler. It's like, bro, The Rock is not, Jushin Thunder Liger, no. But, The Rock could do what he needed to do. The fans loved what he did. They bought tickets to see what he did. The Rock operates on a different level. Okay, he can't do a flippity-doo hurricanrana. Who gives a fuck? I don't care about that anyway. While other people who do care about that, sure, go ahead and put Jushin Thunder Liger on your top 100 list as number 25 and The Rock as number 38 or whatever, and think that you're some highbrow, I know everything type of guy when you don't really know shit. It's just your opinion, and that's cool. And only in recent years, when the bias of the guys like Meltzer have become very, very obvious, have people started saying, it's just his opinion, bro. But when you see that there is that subsection of the wrestling media and the wrestling internet that hate WWE and have always hated it, they will say, I saw somebody on the internet say Vince McMahon hasn't had a good idea since 1998. And I was like, wow, that was that was 20 years ago? Almost 20 years ago? Or over 20 years ago. Yeah, 23 years ago. Like, I'm pretty sure he had more than one good idea. I'm pretty sure he had several in those 23, even if you don't like them, even if you don't like the ideas. There's a bunch of people who don't like John Cena. Okay, you don't like John Cena. How are you going to argue with the success of John Cena? Like, that's the question. It's like, John Cena can't wrestle. Yada, yada. We dealt with this already. We've been through that already. We've already been through the 2006, 2007, 2008. Everybody hates John Cena. We went through that shit already. That's 15 years ago. Now, if you say it out loud, you realize how fucking boring and silly this conversation is. You've been talking for 15 years about how John Cena is not a good wrestler. Meanwhile, John Cena has had an entire career with the biggest box office draw in wrestling during his time, is now doing movies and TV shows, and is successful there, and you're still talking about how John Cena didn't have a good match or how his STF looked like shit. It's like, you're a fucking moron. When Vince says that he doesn't listen to those people, he is saying that part of the audience he doesn't listen to is the part of the audience that he can't win over anyway. So it doubles back to his original statement, or what I started this video with, which is that if you think he's an asshole, okay, fine. He just accepts it. If you think WWE sucks, he's just going to accept that and move on and continue providing for the people who actually do like it, which is smart business. If you don't like Dunkin' Donuts, what is Dunkin' Donuts supposed to do? Just become Krispy Kreme? They're just going to, automatically, whatever they did, we're going to do it. Well, if they're successful being Dunkin' Donuts, they're just going to continue being Dunkin' Donuts. If McDonald's isn't what you like Burger King, then guess what? Go buy Burger King, leave McDonald's alone. But McDonald's is going to be McDonald's because that's what makes McDonald's successful. It was very much a welcome rebuke of the internet wrestling community. And they took that very personally. I've seen it on Twitter. I saw a lot of people taking it very personally because they think they're the only fans. They think they're the only fans in the world. They're so self-centered that they think my very narrow view of what pro wrestling should be is what pro wrestling is, despite the fact that their very narrow view of pro wrestling, especially in modern day, isn't the traditional view of pro wrestling. Fucking Will Ospreay and Ricochet never would have made it in the 80s. For starters, they're fucking midgets. Imagine Ricochet, somebody like Ricochet, who all the internet wrestling community loves because he does these highly stylized, choreographed matches. he walks into the UWF or Mid-South Wrestling, the World Class Championship Wrestling, right? He walks into the arena. First thing they're going to notice is how tiny he is. He's not going to get to do a single flip. He's not going to end up doing a single moonsault, nothing. They're just going to look at him and say, he's fucking small. That big dude should beat him up. If he beats up that big dude, the people in the audience are going to look at each other and say, what the fuck is going on here? If, the big dude is helping him do flips over the top rope, they're going to be like, what? Like, what? And it's going to be a completely different view. It took years for that style to develop. Some of it was seeing Lucha Libre on television, the luchadors and from ECW and WCW, and Shawn Michaels had a little bit of influence with the Lucha Libre too. Seeing those guys do it, that made it palpable and making it okay for a guy like Ricochet or Will Ospreay to come along. That stuff is not really traditional pro wrestling. It's not. When you look at traditional pro wrestling, a lot of it is grappling. It's big burly dudes chopping each other and, headlocks and, working a limb. That's kind of traditional pro wrestling. You don't see a lot of that stuff today, anywhere. Even on these so-called pro wrestling companies, you don't see a lot of those guys and a lot of that style anymore. The style has changed. That's one thing Meltzer can hang his hat on, is he had a very big hand on the style change. And Japan also has a very big hand in the style change. And there's a lot of things that in 2022 we can look at and say, Rey Mysterio had a pretty big hand in it. Jushin Liger, had a pretty big hand in it. The stiffness of it from Japan, the flashiness, a little bit of it comes from Mexico. There's a little bit of it from everywhere, over time. The smaller territories would not have maintained business because they were diversifying and all that stuff. We can get into that, don't want to. But if a guy like Will Ospreay or a guy like Ricochet would have walked into a Bill Watts promotion or a Jim Crockett Promotions, they don't have the charisma, they don't have the persona, the personality, they would not have become stars. They can become stars on the independents because people don't care about that stuff. They just want to see flippity doo-dahs and, flying head scissors, acrobatics. And that's fine if that's what you want, but just say that. We're more into the athletic part. We're not into the theater. We're not into but you're not traditional pro wrestling. If you're a big fan of Will Ospreay, sorry, Will Ospreay never would have made it in the 80s or the 70s. It wouldn't have worked. He's too small. He doesn't have the frame. He doesn't have the charisma. He doesn't have the personality. It wouldn't have worked. He'd been a solid mid-card guy. The last thing I want to talk about, though, is another thing that I think jumped out at people, but it didn't get as much attention, and not as much attention as it probably should have, is when Vince was talking about Succession. This was Pat McAfee's way of getting him to discuss this, was kind of like saying, talking about an old TV show that Vince didn't see. Vince kind of confirms that he doesn't really watch TV. He doesn't even watch Young Rock, which is a show that WWE helps produce. So he doesn't even know about that. But he talked about that he doesn't think a lot about Succession. What's going to happen to the company when he's gone. But he says he wants it to continue on with or without family. And that, he looks at his family members as regular employees and that maybe they aren't the best fit for the company. And that he wants the company to go forward with or without the family. This was brutal. All right. A lot of people think that he was burying the wrestlers by calling them dead weight and all that kind of stuff. No, this was brutal. I mean, imagine being Shane and Stephanie. You've been working there your entire life. In fact, I think Stephanie, this is the only job she's ever had, is working in WWE. I don't think she's ever had any experience working anywhere else. And her dad is basically like, produce or fuck off. I can't have you around if you're not producing. Now, Stephanie does a good job. I can say that much. I've listened to her on the conference call. She speaks very well. She's girl Vince. She's probably not as cold and cutthroat as Vince is, but she's girl Vince. She's got all the bullshit, the McMahonism. She got it all down. Shane, though, I don't know, man. Shane probably got a little bit too much Linda in him. Or maybe a little too much more Vince. Triple H, look at NXT. I don't know, man. But You're dealing with a situation where Vince basically says he wants the company to continue to grow and be successful. The company is his real child. You know, if that's kind of how I formed it, that the company is his real baby. You know, he did well by the children, by, you know, they grew up with everything. They've had jobs for the last 40 years. Everything's been great with them. But when it comes to the company, he wants the company to grow and to continue on without him. And that's with or without family. And I think that was probably the number one reason why he took it public. Because he was kind of like, okay, it's going to belong to the shareholders. You know, when I'm gone, I'm no longer the largest shareholder. The next McMahon will just own all the shares, which will probably be the financial end of it. But who will actually be the CEO, who will actually run things? You know, it don't have to be Stephanie. It don't have to be Triple H. It don't have to be Shane. You know, and Vince has been pretty honest about that. And I'm saying, like, if you're a wrestler on that roster and you know that's how he feels about the entire company, that, you know, it's one thing if you're floating around there thinking, okay, Vince, old man croaks, he doesn't wake up tomorrow. Stephanie's the boss. Triple H is the boss. That's one thing. But if you know, walking through there and you're like, man, could be Stephanie, could be Nick Khan, it could be somebody we don't even know. You know, it could be Linda. She could come back and run the joint if Vince croaks tomorrow. We don't know. And Vince said, like, I don't put that much thought into it. You know, I don't care. You know, I just want the company to continue going forward. And you just be like, wow. You will think that it's been in the business, it's been in the family since the 50s. And Vince is willing to just be like, with or without family. That's crazy. That's crazy. And the children are old enough that they can understand that. They're not little kids. You know, Vince is 70. Shane's 50. You know, these people are old enough to understand where he's coming from, that the business comes first. And that's a tough thing to really lay on people. So when Vince says that the business comes before the kids and what they think their birthright is, and you don't just, you know, be born a McMahon and we'll put you in power. No. Then how could any wrestler think that they are owed a job, especially a job for life? When he said he was wired differently, I believe it. I couldn't do that to my kid. I really couldn't. Like that Bill Gates, Vince McMahon mindset where it's like, I worked hard on this. The kids don't really appreciate it. Fuck the kids. That mentality, I couldn't have it. You know, maybe they know their kids better than I do. But Vince and Bill Gates and a lot of other billionaires kind of get that way too, where they reach a certain level and they don't think the kids can maintain it or even get there or whatever. And they just kind of have this mindset where it's like death of the author. Like, when I'm gone, I don't care what happens. You know, make sure the kids are set financially, but if they get fired, if the company gets taken away from them, too bad. You know, so what? Just hopefully the company will continue to grow and go forward. That's some brutal shit, man. That's harsh. If you truly believe Vince McMahon will fire Shane, then you think he wouldn't fire Bray Wyatt? Come on. Come on, man. You think he'll fire his own son? He wouldn't fire any pro wrestler out there? Come on, man. This was harsh. And it went under the radar because they was focusing on so much other stuff. But that really stuck in my craw. Because I was like, okay, you know, naturally, Vince is not going to tell anybody who's going to run the place anyway. So I think he was kind of being a little bit opaque when it comes to that, you know. So maybe he has a plan. He just doesn't feel like he should publicize it. But from his public statements that he's made several times, it doesn't have to be a McMahon. It doesn't have to be Stephanie. It doesn't have to be Triple H. He can groom them and give them jobs. But when he's gone, they not necessarily taking over. And that's something. And when we started this video, we started talking about Vince firing wrestlers. And now we're talking about Vince looking at the McMahon family and saying to them, you guys are just like everybody else. You know, when you stop producing, I can't use you. What do I have you around for? That's brutal, man. That's brutal. That's cutthroat. I can't do nothing but respect it though, because why should he have so much respect for people who didn't have the work ethic, who didn't put the time in, who maybe they enjoy being at home too much, maybe they're a little too soft, maybe they like being parents, and he was like admittedly not really all that great of a parent. You have to ask those questions. So it's tough. It's really tough. But I've been talking long enough, and this Pat McAfee Vince McMahon video, we could have did 3 or 4 videos on this, on individual things that he talked about. But this thing was eye opening, and it was even more eye opening that Vince was in a relaxed state and was able to basically just toss this stuff out and show that he's still pretty sharp. But at the same time, I think that's when the barbs hurt more. Then when he's in a contentious situation and his blood's elevated and he's pointing and yelling, and people say all kinds of stuff when they get upset. It's when they are chill that things come across as being a lot more colder than it really is, And this came across as being pretty cold. Some of the comments, because he was laughing as he continues to go through this thing, and his explaining his mindset on some stuff it was awesome. It was illuminating. And I would definitely do better at my job if I was Triple H or Stephanie. Because you better hope that he got his will secretly hidden somewhere where it's like everything goes to Stephanie, some things goes to Shane, and something goes to the grandkids and all that stuff. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at a completely different WWE when Vince is gone. And you might not like it. You might actually like wrestling less when it comes to people who didn't put the effort in, who didn't put the work in, don't have the name McMahon. It came in literally after the home runs are already been hit and acting like they're the stars of the show. It's going to be different. All right. So like, share, and subscribe. We'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace.